The WSL season has concluded, so let's talk about it. Well, the 2024-25 WSL season is over. Chelsea are crowned champions one more time, making this their sixth consecutive title in a row, which does leave room to reflect on how the season overall went and what does Chelsea's dominance of the league means. We only have a bit of data to work with in terms of how the season went when it comes to records, but as some of these numbers are going to come through, this season is not necessarily going to be coined as a record-breaking historic WSL season like perhaps the last few have been. And there's a lot of reasons to why that case happened, and admittedly, growth is not linear, right? The WSL is bound to have a bit of a blip, but unfortunately in women's football, there's not much room to have blips, especially in this day and age where there is so much opportunity to grab on so many things. Regardless, with that being said, not every single season is going to be a shattering season, and perhaps this is a season to sit back and reflect on in the off season, which is a big task for the new owners who've not necessarily done just that. And actually, speaking of the first brand new thing that the new owners have introduced is a new logo. Now, we'll get to the logo and sort of what the ownership has been doing and what we've seen them do this season. But let's talk about the football that we got to see and sort of some of those results. Chelsea had quite a remarkable season. In fact, if there's anything that was historic about this season, it was Chelsea's season, and it was Chelsea's incredible dominance. They hit a new high of 60 points across the 22 games, beating their high of 58 points from the season before. Now, how they got to 60 points is the fact that they won undefeated. They had 19 wins out of 22, and the 3 games going down as draws. Not a single loss. Not a single English team in the WSL and the WSL season was able to beat them. And so I think for Chelsea fans, this was a great, historic, fun season. I do wonder if it's fun. It's one thing that I want to hear in the comments from Chelsea fans. Do you usually enjoy seasons that are as smooth sailing as this one? Granted, Chelsea, I don't think, was playing outstanding football in the second half of the season. It didn't matter though, because they got over the line and they won, and that's exactly what Chelsea was looking for, probably to get their hands on the trophy. But for Chelsea fans, is it enjoyable to watch a season like this, or have you preferred watching seasons where it went down to the wire? It went down to the last day of the season, which is the case over the last 5 seasons that Chelsea'd won it. But I think for the general fan and the neutral fan watching the WSL, if the season's over by January, you're losing a little bit of interest, which is why I'm very curious to see how the TV ratings and the numbers overall were looking towards the tail end of the season. And I would assume they dropped pretty heavily. A lack of interest, a lack of competition, and a lack of the overall product are not good things to have, and are perhaps why we saw a less interesting and a less competitive WSL season, which again has been reflected in the 9% decrease of the average attendance. And I think too, when I'm reflecting at previous seasons, and particularly with Chelsea, they always sort of had a superstar that truly shined during the season. Obviously, Sam Kerr is still out rehabbing with her ACL, but without Sam Kerr, you had then Guro Reiten, or before that, in the days of Frank Kirby or Beth England. You always had that sort of hero that was a goal-scoring machine on Chelsea, which is who led them to the title. Chelsea's player of the season, however, this season was not an attacking player, but perhaps it was Natalie Bjorn, who's a defensive player, if you're unaware, who did have an outstanding season. But I think when it's your center back and defensive player who's winning player of the season, it sort of tells you the story of how this WSL year went on. And then you're sort of looking at the other attacking player, or the players who usually steal the highlight reels, who are, again, a big conversation in the WSL title race, which we didn't really have one this season. You're talking Alessia Russo, you're talking Bunny Shaw, you're talking, some of these other players, Toon, whoever it may be. Alessia Russo and Bunny Shaw were tied for the Golden Boot, 12 goals each. Now, Bunny Shaw missed just under half of the season, but was able to get her 12 goals, started 10 games, played 14, and had 12 goals. And so you could almost wonder, what if we had a healthy, fully Bunny Shaw? I mean, you could sit and talk about City's season in general and how it was completely demolished by just horribly timed, long time injuries. But then again, you didn't have that competitiveness when it comes to the Golden Boot. The Golden Boot winner, having 12 goals a season, is not a lot of goals. And if you compare it to the last few seasons, the Golden Boot winner had always had over 20 goals. Look at Sam Kerr's record. Look at Viviana Miedema's records when she's won those Golden Boots. 12 goals is quite minimal for a Golden Boot. And so you lacked that edge of competitiveness when it comes to who's leading the Golden Boot, who is leading the title race. There was not that clash between players and between teams that we often see, which is what generates interest. Now, that solely goes down to what you're seeing on the pitch and not necessarily, to how the owners are operating. But it is a moment to reflect of, okay, if Chelsea have gotten this dominant, is it time to change how the league operates? And we'll get to that in just a moment. So at the top of the table, you didn't have a title race this time round. At the bottom of the table, you didn't have a relegation battle, which is a continued trend that we've seen. In fact, Crystal Palace finished with just 10 points. That's half of Spurs, who were right on top of them. And so that's where the relegation battle should be happening, and you're not seeing any of it. And that's Spurs have not won a game since January. I don't think we've talked about how abysmal Spurs' season has been. But it also just shows you how the relegated team has often been the team that just got promoted and they're going down. It was Bristol City last year. It's freaking Crystal Palace this year. And it's London Lionesses who are getting promoted for the upcoming season. Is it going to be the same story with them? You'd hope not. Why? For the health of the league and for the product that people are buying and going out to watch. It's just simply not healthy for the interest rates, and it's not a way to keep in people. And again, this isn't me just making stuff out of my head. You're seeing that being reflected in the numbers and the attendance dip. And then you're looking sort of at the mid-table of the season. You've got obviously Aston Villa, who made a really good run towards the end of the season. Liverpool, Everton, West Ham, who I also think had a good second half of the season. But those teams, once again, and this is yet another season where they've not really closed down the gap between themselves and the top four. And that's apparent in the number of points. The top four, you've got Chelsea, Arsenal, United, and City. Right underneath is Brighton with 28 points. City, 43. That's almost 15 points difference between the fourth and the fifth. That's not very competitive. Now, with that being said, sort of between the fifth and down to ninth, so you're talking Brighton, Villa, Liverpool, Everton, and West Ham, there's a 5-point gap. And so between them, the gap was close, which is what we kind of often see, but those teams have not been able to close the gap on the top four, which is another story that continues. And it's kind of disappointing because when you look at the teams who are sitting in that mid-table range, it's Liverpool, West Ham, City, Everton, and I'm not going to include Brighton in this next point that I'm making, but their men's teams are quite rich, and they haven't fully invested in their women's budgets. That's been a consistent story with Everton and West Ham whenever they need to go in and recruit players for the January window, for the summer window. Similarly, it was kind of a similar story with Liverpool. They saw Matt Beard get sacked. Can't really blame him and fault him because he doesn't really have the big budget that he wants to work with. Admittedly, they broke the bank with getting Olivia Smith, who, in my opinion, had an outstanding season. But that's not the point. The point goes back to that these teams have, yet again, not been able to close the gap with the top four teams. Not very good. And then you take a closer look at these teams, and what you find out is that no Liverpool, West Ham, Aston Villa, or Everton player got called up to an England camp in the past year. And so when you look at that and break it down, you maybe get to understand as to why you're seeing that decrease in attendance and interest in such numbers. England didn't qualify for the Olympics with Great Britain, so that was the first summer, the 2024 summer was the first summer in a few years that they hadn't played in a major tournament. They also weren't necessarily continuing their outstanding streak, one per se, few draws, sprinkled a few losses here and there. England and the Lionesses didn't thrive over the last 12 months, which again, it is okay. But what we're understanding, and I think we sort of already understood that, but this point really cemented it, is England's success and the Lionesses' success is so very connected to the WSL. If the Lionesses are not able to get the casuals and sort of the walking by fans to come into the stadiums, because they're not winning and because they're not, in a major tournament. Again, this is not to say that Lionesses are struggling. They're absolutely going to go into the 2025 Euros as the reigning champions and have another dominant time there. But that's not the point. The point is the lack of a major tournament for England and the lack of their continued dominance connect to why the WSL had a rough patch. And not every single league operates as such. When you look around at the other European leagues, that I think the German league, for example, the Frauen-Bundesliga, was a very fun, exciting season this time round. At one point, you had 4 teams all battling for the title. That's fun. We obviously know Bayern continued their winning ways and captured the title yet again. But it featured a 4-way battle at one point. Real Madrid, they beat Barcelona for the first time in their history. And even though everybody probably knew Barcelona was winning, and they did win it with a few games to go, and they had beaten Real Madrid in their other meetings, it sort of made it a little bit fun at the top of the table where, okay, it's the 2 big dogs beating the rest, but there was a bit of a challenge in there. But I think in the offseason now for the new owners, they need to look around and see what's working for other leagues and what's not working for other leagues. If this is something to be brought into the WSL, would it work? Would it not work? It's not as simple as look around, this is working there, let's bring it into the WSL, it's definitely going to work here. Football is not as straightforward as this. Football culture is not as simply dissected as that, but it's important in the offseason to look around and just study the different markets, study the different leagues in Europe, and sort of learn how to best market the WSL coming out of the Euros should England not win. Again, this is a conversation we'll have way after the Euros, depending on how England does, but certainly something that you have to keep in mind. And I keep referring back to the attendance drop and the crowd sizes, and let me tell you, crowd sizes and attendance does not tell you this is how growth is going and this is how interest is going. Absolutely not. It's not the perfect litmus paper, but it's an indicator of the health of the fans' relationship with the game. The WSL has gone to a point where they're having a bit of a hiccup. And, where do you mix it up? Do you mix it up with the relegation? Do you mix it up with the top of the table? Do you mix it up with the Champions League qualifier, which is something that I've continuously brought up in my earlier reviews and previews of the WSL? And my argument usually is you have a great battle at the top of the table. You usually, if you're lucky, sometimes get a good back and forth in the relegation zone. And then it's like sitting in that mid-table, and then you sort of usually have a clear-cut Champions League qualifier sitting in that 3rd spot. That's where I think we can introduce a little bit of a fun knockout playoff system, right? So let's not make it as clear-cut as the team that finishes in 3rd spot gets that automatic Champions League qualifier. Let's make it a playoff between all the teams finishing 3rd down to 7th, 8th, 6th, whatever works out in terms of scheduling and playing home and away. The winner of this mini little playoff tournament gets the Champions League qualifier. And again, I probably advocate for that point more than ever, given that we did not have a relegation battle and we did not have a title challenge and a title back and forth. And so I think that's something that I've continuously said I'd like to see included in the WSL. I wouldn't change the relegation, back and forth. I certainly wouldn't scrap relegation, and I wouldn't change how the title is won. I think the way that it is won, you finish at the top of the table, depending on the points across the season, is how it should be won in England. So if you probably haven't caught on it, I'm not a very big fan of the current owners who have taken over the WSL, and actually at the head of it is a Canadian. But as a Canadian myself here, I can tell you a lot of the ideas that she's bringing in is not very North American, Canada specific. We're not doing any of that stuff out here in Canada. The new logo, it doesn't resonate with WSL fans. It's a cool logo for like a shoe sneaker line. I'm not sure if it tells you this is a women's football league. Scrapping the championship and calling it WSL2 is going 10 steps backwards. I think one of the great steps that the WSL took, a few years ago when they called the championship was when they scrapped calling it WSL2 and they called it the championship. That connects straight back with football culture in Europe and in England. Your casual fan who doesn't know what the WSL stands for, who doesn't watch the WSL, if you say WSL2, they're not going to understand what you're talking about. If you say the championship, then that will resonate with them. They don't need to know exactly where the championship ranks, but you'll understand that is the tier right under the top tier. it's sort of lingo. Like, lingo is important when it comes to word of mouth, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to branding. It's all really important, and I'm not sure WSL2 gets the point across. The league has already struggled with SEO and discoverability online this entire last season. Every time I'd look up WSL, I would get the World Surfing League. Figure out your discoverability. Figure out why that issue is happening. That's I think that is more concerning than the rest. That's something that team needs to get on. And so new branding doesn't really look as nice. This whole idea of connecting with a fan base like Taylor Swift, I think is insulting, and I think it's super offending. This year, the league sort of took a stance of connecting with the Taylor Swift fans of women's football, and the result was a decrease and a drop in average attendance. And that's because they didn't connect with the core group of women's football supporters. They didn't connect with the casual supporters who would drop in for that big game, which could increase attendance averages. There has been this notion sort of pushed by like women's football in the WSL as a fun, girly pop. Hang out for the girls on the weekend and the families, and only us, we should be going to the football games. And that's not how it works. That's not who your target audience should be of really wanting to go out to women's football. There's rivalries. There's going to be rubbish talk. There's going to be garbage talking. There's going to be, battles where fans are clashing. That's football culture. It's not a go out with the girls and the family to watch a fun spectacle. It surely could be that too. There's a lot of families that find the environments being family friendly and fun and exciting and not hostile, and that's great. That's fantastic to have. But those are not the people who are going to be helping you with revenue or match day ticket sales. And I just fear that they haven't got the branding and the marketing correctly with reaching the right fan base, in my humble opinion. They need to connect with the fans, see what the fans want, connect with the clubs and the club's identities. I don't really know if this new logo tells me the club's identities. So I think there needs to be more dialogue with the fans, with the clubs, with the players, and just sort of a better understanding of what the WSL represents, the history of it, the football culture of it, English football culture. I'm not from England. I've never lived in the English football culture, but I think as I've consumed the WSL for over a decade now, I sort of understand a little bit of it. And perhaps the owners need to do a better effort of doing that. We look ahead for next season. Obviously, there's plenty to happen before next season kicks off. The Euros, the summer window. It's going to be fun. Let me know your thoughts of what you thought this WSL season was. Personally, for me, it was not as exciting. I think it lacked a bit of interest from my end. I watched it. I enjoyed it. But I do think it needed that oomph, which it didn't have. So we need oomphs in the game. But let me know your thoughts. I'd be very, very interested and intrigued to know. As always, to stay updated and to keep enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.